Now we're going to make a tray that fits in. This tray is from the prototype, the original that I made, and it does fit, and you can see that there's a little bit of a gap. You don't want it super tight, otherwise you won't be able to get it out. So keep in mind, like I said, if you have it too tall, that's already too much, but it gives me, that play allows me to tip it to get it out. That's the reason that you don't want the tray to be the entire way. It's going to be really hard to get it out. So here's how it's done. Miter joints, instead of using the rabbets that we do a lot, and it is put into a dado in the bottom. So it is a very strong tray. So we need our measurements. Now because your tray may be a different size than mine, I'm going to give you the measurements for mine, and then you can decide whether you want it this size, or like I said, I'm making mine a little more than halfway, and it varies. So take your tape measure and decide, maybe I'm going to do mine 10 inches. So my tray, 10 inches, and then your width, it's exactly 6 3/4, so I think I'll do 6 5/8 wide. 6 5/8. In other words, that's 1/8 of an inch smaller than the inside. Okay, you just need that little bit of gap. Now from these measurements, I know that my miters are going to come in at 45 degrees. And I want these pieces to all be 1/2 of an inch thick. So I've got a 10 and a 6 5/8, and all of them are 1.5. So from here, if we wanted to do a cut list, 2 pieces, and I know their width. I said I wanted them 1 3/4 tall. That's a width. That's the width of this right there by 10, because that's total. And I need 2 more pieces that are 1 3/4 by 6 5/8, my total. 6 5/8. Now that I have this cut list, I can cut these pieces, plane them down to size, and from there we can get the bottom and do all the grooves. Next thing we do, I'm going to check out the scrap bin and try to find pieces that work, because this is all I need, and this is not hard to find. They're a little wider than 1 3/4, and they're full thickness, and they're enough length. Now, speaking of length, keep in mind, my pieces are 10 and 6 5/8. I don't want anything going through my planer less than 12. So how do we fix this? This is way too short. So all we're going to do is I'm going to add them together. The rough length for that is 11. Rough length for that maybe 7.5 or so. So 11 plus 7.5, 18.5. So if I cut 2 pieces 18.5 inches long, then I'll have enough length for a long piece and a short piece out of both. But I've got to keep them long so I can run them through the planer and the sander. Then I'll cut length after. So what that means is I'm taking our squaring procedure and kind of moving some parts, moving them around. Remember, the planer can go anywhere in that procedure. I'm now moving the planer up before I cut length. So set it to 18.5 and make your cuts. Now, if you're building this tray and happen to find one piece that's wide enough for both and long enough as well, great, you'll just cut it down later. So I basically cut these to length, I turned right around, and I'm using the planer. We're going to plane these down to 1/2 inch. So that's a couple of passes more than we're used to. But we've done that a couple times. Just set it to the right amount, the 14/16, and just keep planing till you get to just a little thicker than 1/2 inch, because we're going to sand the rest. Now we come to the table saw to cut them to our width, whatever that happens to be. Mine is 1 3/4. Now we're going to cut things to the right length. Now, because we're using miter joints, this doesn't really work as far as your measurements, so we're going to have to make some measurements with a tape measure and a pencil. But to start, I'm just going to cut a miter on both ends, because I know they're both going to be mitered anyway. I'm just going to save myself a little bit of time. So I'm just cutting off enough to chop off the very corner of it. Hold it tight so it doesn't move. Because remember on miters, the board will always want to move away from the blade. So I'm putting a lot of pressure on that and cutting nice and slow. And I always tend to pull it away from the blade before I pull the blade up. And we just flip it over end for end and do the same thing. Right there. Hold it tight. And then repeat. Now I don't like this, so I want the miter. This will be my outside. I'd like the good side to be facing me. Good. So now out of both of these, I should be getting a long one and a short one. So all I have to do is measure 10. 10 is right here. And I'm going to put that mark on the top, and that's going to be important. Now remember, from here, with an angle this way, the angle here has to go in that way. So I usually will draw a mark on there so I know which way it has to go. Obviously, this is turned the wrong direction, so I have to turn it to the other 45. So now I take the piece, I bring it down, and I can still see the shadow, where the shadow is going to cut. Right there. So here's my mark, and the shadow needs to be on this side of the line. So right about there. Now that I've got that set, I kind of hold it there. I'm going to put my spacer right on the end, right here, and now I can use this, but not for the measurement. I use it as a way to make it so that the second one I cut will be exactly the same as this one. So I can hold it there and cut. Obviously, I can't pull that away from the blade like I usually do, but that's fine. I'll do the same on this one. So I don't want to have to redo this again. So I do both 10s, and then I'll do 2 6 5/8. There we go. So now I'm guaranteed that these two, if I line them up, are exactly the same length, and that's what I wanted. We do the exact same thing for the 6 5/8, and now both of these ends have miters, so pick your end. I'll just do 6 5/8 and do the same routine.